and died for me. Died on Calvary. No wind, no rain, no grief, no pain can separate me from your love so free. Someone told me about your love, how you came from heaven above.
I have seen Eve's face twice, or maybe twice and a half. Eve at first, or the first Eve, she was my brokenness wrapped up in flesh, my brokenness from a family warped and enmeshed. Her eyes said, I will love you forever, but her pain caused that to change every hour. Yet she was the beauty I beheld, I was the beholder. My undefined element called fire, we met in the garden, I met her garden, Nekiva meeting Zakar as a man that is hardened. I have met her in the past as Isha and Neshiyim, Ebony, Nubian, Empress, Menen. An ode to beauty, a sonnet of melanin, she was Eve at first, or the first Eve. She came from me and I came from her, kisses of honeydew sipped from each other's lips. I was me when I was joined to her hips. I have seen your face, Eve, sometimes stained with tears, apprehensive when apprehended by your fears, but mostly beaming with light. When my words became enfleshed in your mind, when I love you became the incarnated light, you were peace in every smile. Yet I must confess, please forgive me, Eve, for I have sinned, let me confess. The second Eve caused me to digress. I met her in the garden of loneliness, not so melanin stained, but her beauty was African. Strength that would never relent, she made me weak to my former convictions and even some of my own pretense. Armed with brokenness of her own, she made my brokenness known. Eve even became flesh of my flesh and bone of another Adam's bone. Our love is despised by the pious, our piety despised by the religious. She was the same Eve. Even though she wore a different skin, brokenness found brokenness within. Words were sharp to cut asunder. Her embraces played melodies on my soul. She was my Eve even against the odds. She was in love, but I loved her. Her arrogance and sense of entitlement, I have seen her face. I have seen your face, Eve. Wearing a daughter's shame, I have seen her face. I have seen your face, Eve. I have seen your faces. Too strong to cry, but adorned in pain. I have seen them, I have seen my Eves, I have seen you, Eves. And where doubt lingers, I may have even seen another. Or maybe I didn't and she's only something imagined, half human and half divine, her face hidden from the mire of my eyes and the lust therein. Her face defaced by a Savior's sin, but that too may have just been something that I have imagined. A figure stolen from my imaginations, conjured in the halls of obscure hallucinations. I have seen her face, whether in my mind or otherwise. I have seen her face, half human and half in disguise. I have seen her face. I have seen your faces, Eves. I have seen Eve, wishing that she was. I have seen Eve. Thank you very much.
Yes, Massive and crew, welcome again to the Ishden. I'm a boy Robert, and as you can see, we're not again, boy, I got good too, you know. We're not in different spaces again. My brother decided to come to Mobile. I will say, yo, while he's in Mobile, let's just do this and make the people say we are real brother in a real life. I don't know, talk, I don't just lip service. Right, so you can see Napoleon in the studios of FBN as we record this one. Okay. Welcome, bro.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so the last time, again, you know, because remember we had some technical difficulties, yes. But technical difficulties always work out for our benefit, right? So we are looking at a very crucial topic. This month is actually Family Month, and we are looking at the male-female relationship. Not going to say the male versus female thing, because there's no competition, right, in the thing. As Napoleon said in the first episode, men are not from Mars and women are not from Venus.
That's correct.
We are created on Earth, and as such, God has a mandate for both genders, right, to fulfill on Earth.
Right here on Earth.
Right, yes, sir. Right? We are kingdom people.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear us say it over and over and over again. The narrative has to begin in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. Right? Not in Genesis chapter 3, because if you begin right there, so we go in a turmoil, we go begin where sin has shaped, reshaped what God intended.
And guilt and shame and all of and accusations and all of those,
Right, and we can't go. Last week we spoke about self-forgiveness.
Right.
And we are trying to let us know as men that yes, some things happened to us, yes, we did some things, and the negative impact of those things we have had to live with, but we can move into the freedom of God.
Absolutely.
And the freedom of God begin by saying, I forgive me.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And we're going to continue to sing that song, because we understand that when self-forgiveness sets in, when we have walked through the process of self-forgiveness, and self-forgiveness is not excusing your wrongs, but it's owning them and then moving beyond them.
Absolutely.
Right? And in that freedom, you can treat one right.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to look at. How do we relate to our female counterparts? Are they lesser than? Are they supposed to be under our feet? What is the kingdom perspective on this matter? How has the kingdom reframed this, and how should our thinking towards women and our actions as well, how should these things work as a kingdom man? And we have to speak to the men in the street as well.
We have to.
Right?
We have to.
Yeah.
And we have to fix some of the things that we have done at church as well.
Yeah.
The church fathers said some very, very ugly things about our sisters.
Yeah.
In fact, they kind of set the narrative for how people understand women, and especially women in church, and church women at home.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has been negative. Some have called women like the pit. Some have accused women of, okay, so Satan could not get to the man, so he used you. All of those negative things, giving the impression that all of what happened is because of the woman.
Yeah.
And again, that's reading from Genesis 3.
Yeah.
And we tend to hear that from Genesis 3. And that needs to be fixed, first of all, from those in religious authority.
Yeah.
To fix it, because the story begins at Genesis 1 and 2, and the narrative in terms of how we talk about it from Genesis 3 also need to be fixed.
Yeah.
For instance, at Genesis 3, Adam is blaming, is passing off blame. I never hear Eve blame nobody.
No.
If you think of the narrative carefully. So it is a fight that is unnecessary.
Yeah.
It is a putting down that is uncalled for. And that needs to be fixed in how we read and understand what God intends for us as men and women. And you're right, in this month we must have that conversation properly. So that we are hearing clearly God's heart and how we live that out in kingdom.
Yeah. And it is always essential to determine where we are starting this conversation.
Absolutely.
Right? If we don't determine, if you start at a faulty point, it's going to be seldom that the conversation naturally corrects itself.
True. And I just a little bit of side issue. Very often too, we talk about us as black people in terms of transatlantic slaves. And we tend to forget our libraries in Addis Ababa. We tend to forget some of the amazing things that we as a race have accomplished and achieved. And every time we center it as if that is the only thing that can define us. No, I'm not saying it wasn't horrible. That's not the point. But just understand where the story for us actually began. The cradle of civilization in so many significant ways. Same kind of narrative happens on this side. That need to be fixed as well.
Yeah. And we need to have that conversation.
Yeah, man.
The black man conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it is essential. And a lot of the things that we are going through it is as a result of us not going back to where we are from.
Absolutely.
Not looking on that narrative. And if we are flowing from the bitterness of the transatlantic slave trade, because nothing, I mean, I don't care if people want to say, oh, the gospel came to Africa because of this. Right? That is nothing to celebrate.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? If the reality is that we were tortured, we were chained like puss and dog and rat and hog in the belly of some of these ships, and you were chained to a man who died and him start decompose. If you begin the narrative of our sojourn as Western Africans, there, boy, it now going to end. We see what's happening now.
We see it, especially.
Right, we see what's happening now. So we definitely need to look at that.
Yeah,
that we never start from February, so we could deal with it. You know, but we are going to deal with that. And we are saying again, the story of man and woman began in Genesis 1
and 2. Yeah, made in his image, made equal dignity, equal respect, equal authority, equal in his image, in every sense of the word. And so there is nothing in those narratives that should give anybody any impression that somehow one is superior to the other.
True.
It's equal dominion if we read the text as presented to us. Equal in dominion. It's very important.
It doesn't often play out like that.
No.
In our many of our church circles, it does not often play out like that. We say it, even in my church circle. Right? We say that male and female are equal. We treat them equal on a localized level, but we have never had a female superintendent of our fellowship. So I don't know if religiously or however it plays out, but it says to me that over 80 years of existence, a woman has never risen to the top. And that to me may be, we claim to believe it, but somehow it's not working out as it should. Austin made a point in the first program that we want to come, because Austin does believe this. Right? But he made the point that there are differences. If Flojo, who is the fastest woman ever, and we're not going to go into how she became the fastest woman ever, but if she was qualifying with the males to run in the Olympics, her time being 10.4 something in the 100 meter, would not have qualified her, because the slowest men qualifying were running at 10.3 plus. So there are differences. There are noticeable differences in how the male and the female are. The WNBA, NBA players can't compete in the NBA.
Absolutely.
The female FIFA World Cup players cannot compete in the men's World Cup. Right? So what do these differences say? How should we treat these differences?
We have to celebrate the differences, because the differences complement us. We have to see them in a complementary way, rather than an attempt to say these differences separate us and cause us to function away from each other, rather than understanding that the fact that generally men are stronger is something to use to dominate and so on. So we have to be careful of it. The differences, such as they are intended to help us to complement each other in our respective roles. Men will not be able to have children via a womb. We understand that. So there are physical differences. And we're also saying that if there are physical differences, there are also going to be emotional differences. Different how men treat with issues, differently from how women treat with issues. So my wife will say to me, I need that curtain hung now, or can you hang this curtain for me? I may say, may I go do it? And she just pick it up and do it right away. It's just a part of the difference in how our wiring goes emotionally. We have to recognize that there are, in fact, different ways in which we are wired as men and women, and we have to appreciate those differences, not in a way to make us compete, not in a way to put one on Mars and one on Venus, but to help us to function properly and rightly, right here in this space that we have given. And it's very important that we understand and appreciate that there are differences. Men are not a form of women,
Yeah.
and women are not a form of men. Those are distinct and important differences that are intended to make us function in the one way. You see, God did not create another being and call that other being woman. He takes Eve out of man.
Yeah.
In that sense, to recognize the inseparability.
Yeah, the intricate link between and dependency in some regards as well.
The interdependency, interconnectedness between men and women. So the good thing is, an amazing thing that God does is that, unlike the other creatures, it'll be one of that and one of that, but He takes that out of the other.
Yeah.
And then men come from in that complementary sense that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 11.
Yeah.
It's very, very important that we recognize it and celebrate it for what God intended in the first place.
Yeah, if we deviate from that, and you made some points, complementing rather than competing, and loosely used, but because it rhymes, completing rather than competing, right? There is a sense where the differences don't divide us or shouldn't divide us.
Yeah.
And I can understand the perspective, though flawed, of the men from Mars, women from Venus. The most typical, like every person here talk on relationships, talk about the man and the woman driving past ice cream shop, devil house.
Yes.
And the woman turns to the man and say, honey, don't you feel for some ice cream?
Yes.
And the man say, no man, I'm good and keep driving. And then 5 minutes down the road, the man say, you're so unconscionable. I asked you for ice cream a while ago.
Yes.
And the man is like, when you asked me if me want ice cream.
Yes.
So it is coming to an understanding that women are different in how they express themselves. And then being sensitive to this. Not flaring up and saying, if you want ice cream, woman, just say you want ice cream. But it's understanding these differences and seeing where the differences are meant to complement.
And on the other side of it, the sister needs to know that he's not a mind reader.
Yes, sir.
She needs to know, even though that's how she expresses it herself, she has to also appreciate that he is not a mind reader.
Yeah.
And therefore, we reduce attention when we can appreciate the differences in our wiring.
Yeah.
And we can't assume that because you have said it, then I must know that's what you want. You know? In fact, sometimes I might go and get it, and you say, but I changed my mind.
Whoa, boy.
And that just adds to the issue. You know what I mean? Why you didn't want it at the time you say it, you go and get it, but change my mind, I want something else. I want cheesecake. You know what I mean? So we have to recognize those challenges too, in terms of just how the outworking is without making it adversarial.
Yeah, and I think that point is crucial. Too often, the wiring which this God has put in us is dealt with as a conflict.
Yeah.
Right? So one can never say so from day one.
Yeah.
How me feel know a woman say, and you get me?
Yes.
Rather than just working with each other to say, all right, if God made us this way, He must have made us this way for a reason.
A particular purpose.
Right? You speak about the dealing with emotions differently. And men, we think that we are more rational and more logical in some regards. So if we have these strengths, we need to work with the strengths and see even the weaknesses in certain areas as being answered by the strength of the other gender.
Absolutely. That's what God intends.
Yeah.
So that we don't become animals.
Yep.
Because the animals don't have this. We are not made a little higher than the animals.
Yes.
We are made a little lower than the angels. Some translations a little lower than God, in that sense. So we have to begin to understand ourselves properly in terms of what God intends in creation. And I think too often we miss it. And we see how the narrative unfolds because of a misunderstanding of what it intends. And we see it in Jewish society. We see it so clearly in the laws, that section, the Pentateuch. And we see how it unfolds in the rest of Jewish history in that sense. The boy is valued more. The woman is uncleaner longer if she has a girl. And all of those things that redefine how the relationship is, and those are fed in from very, very early. And even when new covenant comes, we still want to carry over some of those old covenant notions. The idea of uncleanness, the man is only unclean if he touches something in that way, but a woman can be inherently unclean. All of these notions come out of that misunderstanding and indeed the effect of sin and how sin has discolored, indeed corrupted the relationship and the understanding of ourselves, how we feel about ourselves and how we relate to our sisters.
Yeah, and it needs to be fixed. It definitely needs to be fixed. In our culture, we see where, I guess because we think women are, well, insignificant really. You know, we credit them with child's birth. Every man love their mother. If you want to be a big artist, just do a song about
your mother.
Hello, Mama Africa. Just do a song about mother. But then we revere our mothers, at least it seems so. But then the daughter up on the street side is, hey girl, come here now. And if she ever don't answer to that, then it's pure class up. Right? And our culture, pop culture, there's a statement that I borrowed a research from you to make a presentation. And I think you could make the presentation and I filled in for you. And in the research it says, show me who write the songs of a nation. And I don't care who write her laws. And we are seeing that. The songs, most of the songs, primarily in our culture, right? Apart from, thank God for man like Barry Salmon, even though he may have some little songs again. When we go check one woman and come in, and they must say, well, I'm afraid to go in because if lipstick stain, the colors and them kind of things. But the dancehall culture really doesn't celebrate our women.
It doesn't.
It does not celebrate our women. They are objectified. And primarily they are objectified as sexual objects. Just sex objects for gratification. Not even to please them sexually, but simply to gratify our own desires. Right? How can we begin to address that
imbalance? I think Bobby, if we go back to Jesus and his own treatment and his own interaction with women. In fact, one of the first cases we see is in John 4 or 5 thereabouts, where he's encountering this Samaritan woman. First of all, she's Samaritan. He has no business talking to a Samaritan, and worse, a Samaritan woman. Then he's talking to a woman by herself, which, you know, you holiness people shun the very appearance of evil. so that alone should mean that Jesus, watch out, you're in trouble. You know, it's a dangerous woman that. Then as the story unfolds, we hear that she have 5 husbands. No, this is a depth of immorality, you know what I mean? But we forget that David had, 8 women. Wives.
And not to mention Solomon.
Oh gosh, but you know, but we vilify her even now. In fact, if you hear most of the conversations about her, they are stories of a prostitute, of a bad woman, of an immoral woman. And I wondered to myself, what is that made her immoral? Then Jesus says, the man that you are now living with is not your husband. I say, see that? And we begin to rip her. What we forget is that she has had 5 husbands. The man she's living with is not her husband. But we forget the stories about the 7th man in her life. And that 7th man, Jesus, takes her story, turns it around, dignifies her, sends her to evangelize, so that the men in the community come back and say, we believe, not so much because of what you have said, but because you have brought us to Jesus. So Jesus lifts her, and the Pharisees listening at the time would have been mortified, because Jesus and John, they are now using this woman as a testimony. In the culture of the day, the woman was her word meant nothing.
They couldn't testify in court,
or it meant even if she came to court, it didn't matter. But Jesus gave that back to her. In other words, Jesus gave her back her voice. Because the Bible says, in the beginning was the Word. It didn't say in the beginning was video. So he gave her back her capacity to talk, to be heard. So it was now not little children are to be seen and not heard. It's women. But Jesus says, I want to hear you. You have a story. There's something that you must say. It's important and you must say it. So Jesus elevated the woman. Jesus gave her a voice. Jesus gave her a place in his story, in a direct way.
Yeah.
John says, I am telling you this so that you might believe.
Yeah.
And one of the first witnesses that John pulls is a woman.
Yeah.
The last witness that John pulls is the woman.
As well, yeah.
And that tells us that perhaps Christianity, above all the worldviews, liberates, elevates, and transforms how women are understood and how they are to be treated.
Yeah.
I make no apology for that. That's why I'm proud to be a Christian in a time and in a space where there's this very wrong notion about our women. It's very important. But as well, Jesus and the spiritual order.
Yeah.
Here's a girl that obviously does wrong. She's caught in the very act of adultery.
Yeah.
Now, the law says whomever is caught in the act of adultery is to be stoned.
Yeah.
Or, well, it says to be killed. It didn't say how.
Yeah.
yeah. But the point is. yeah. So they grab stone to stone her, and yet they forget that David committed adultery.
Yeah. True.
They forget. But that's not in their mind. It's a woman. And so they want to stone her. There's something that Jesus says that I find defining in the story. Jesus says, I do not condemn you.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, Bobby, that so many of our women live under condemnation.
Yeah, true.
Now, we're not saying by any stretch of the imagination that her going to sleep with another man
is permissible.
Is permissible.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. But we are saying, can we extend grace to the girl in our church who gets pregnant?
Mm.
And the first thing we hear is not leave church, go have your baby and come back. None of those.
Yeah.
The first thing she hears is, I do not condemn you.
Yep.
What a difference it would make if she has that sense that authority and community does not begin her narrative at condemnation.
Yeah. And it because of the masculine face of leadership, it is not just that it's leadership and authority.
It's male.
It's male leadership and authority
Yes,
is meeting out this judgment to me.
Yeah.
And again, it may not be what is intended. But a young lady who is backbenched, and even after the picnic barn, this young lady is still told you have to now prove to the congregation and the church.
Fruits of righteousness.
Yeah. And it's really, this story of the woman caught in the act of adultery, we don't know if you want to breed or not, right? Because it could very well be that she was an unmarried woman or a married woman and her man sterile. We don't know the conditions in which she was caught, right? So here is a woman who definitely bears the face of sin.
Yeah.
And Jesus Christ comes to her, and in his own words, like you said, it wasn't video before.
Yeah.
It is words that he used
absolutely.
to show her the heart of God. And a lot of times we see the flip side in our churches, where words are used to speak negatively of our females.
True.
From the pulpit a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Right? This nonsense that's going around now is really, I'm hearing, there's a man that you'll have to remember the man's name. Right, you brought it on me. Anyways, so, but the spirit of Jezebel is the common treatment of sexual deviation or sexual promiscuity. Anything that comes against the church sexually is normally, maybe again it's because the face of leadership in the church is masculine. So it has to be the spirit of Jezebel.
Yeah.
Right?
And nobody sees this spirit of Diotrephes.
Yes, that man.
Diotrephes mash up the church and want power for himself and all of that and was excluding everybody else because he was about power and control.
Yeah.
And it's the same idea, you know.
Yeah,
but nobody's calling it the spirit of Diotrephes.
Yeah.
Everybody says the spirit of Jezebel because it's a spirit that moves people towards control.
Yeah.
We sexualize it and feminize it
because
it suits our purpose as well. Watch a girl as well, Bobby, who comes in. It may be one or two stories depending on how you read the narrative. She comes And she's crying and she's wiping Jesus's feet with her hair and all of that, and people are watching, you know. What a sight it must have been.
Yeah.
Jesus says, lower. She's pouring out, she has saved all of this money and she has bought this box of ointment. The stories tell us that it may have cost as much as a year's wages.
Yeah, yeah.
And she pours this out and people are upset because they don't understand that here's the heart of a woman who is so thankful to God for forgiveness.
Yeah.
It fits into our narrative of last week. We don't understand how women deal with being forgiven.
Yeah.
We don't, as men, know how to appreciate it
True.
properly. And here's a girl, and Jesus celebrates her. We don't know her name, but this is what Jesus says about her. What she has done. Her story will be told with a passion story.
Living testimony, pretty much.
Absolutely. And we have to, and here again we are seeing Jesus celebrating a girl in the space of worship. Something that probably the men would not have done, because when the men had the opportunity to wash each other's feet, they refused.
They frowned on it.
They refused.
They frowned on
but
it.
This girl, she walks up, and she didn't put on an apron.
Yeah.
She used her hair, the thing most precious to her, and Jesus celebrated her.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Jesus, who is always elevating, who is always celebrating, who is always empowering women. And he does it as well, Bobby, even the way he did the parables.
Yeah.
One parable that comes to mind is the Luke 15 text. In Luke 15 we have the story of the lost son,
Yeah.
the story of the lost coin,
Lost sheep.
and the story of the lost sheep. Now, we are pretty clear in our minds in the story of the lost sheep that the shepherd that goes in search of the sheep is the father.
Yeah, man.
And we are very clear. Well, the text says in the Luke that the father went, he saw his son coming in and he runs to him. We are very clear as the father. Now, but when we go into the house and the woman is sweeping and looking for her coin, who is the woman?
Can't be God, brother. No.
And the Pharisees
That's
were
how we treat it.
Yeah, the Pharisees were frightened.
That's how we
that
treat it.
God, Jesus is talking about God and using
A woman.
woman imagery.
Yeah.
And that was revolutionary, because Jesus always used these female stories, and that Jesus says in another place, the sister from Ethiopia, make her no look bad. And it's, what? Jesus is not only using a woman, but he's using a foreign woman to make the point.
One from Ethiopia. Yeah.
And Jesus used stories of women to point to the hypocrisy, to point to the hostility, to point to a kind of patriarchy that pushed hegemony in a way that was destructive.
Yeah.
And so when Jesus began to tell stories and began to include women in the stories and gave women a leading role, it was disruptive, but it was revolutionary, so that people could see again what God intended for women in the relationship with himself, in community, and among themselves.
Yeah. And we want persons to remember where we are coming from, right? We are coming from the perspective that males and females are created to have dominion. If we deflate the worth of one party, we are deflating the intent of God.
Absolutely.
And we cannot fulfill appropriately the mandate that God has put in the bosom of males and females.
No pun intended.
No, not at all. Right? So it is, and even when we look to the Old Testament, we saw a little bit of this as a hen broods over her chicks, so God watches over Jerusalem. But this obviously would have been resisted.
Absolutely.
Right? Because, no, you better say like a rooster crow, or whatever, a cock crow, however you want to put it. But these imagery, they are there. But yet still we see the accusation against the church as being oppressive towards women, primarily from a more of a North American and European perspective.
Yeah.
A lot of women have resisted the church because it seems more patriarchal in how it carries out its role. You know, women are not celebrated, but we are here saying that Jesus Christ celebrated women.
Yeah, celebrated, elevated.
Yeah.
Saw them not as sexual beings. There's this narrative of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and Jesus don't need that. Mary Magdalene don't need that.
Yeah.
And that is again a part of the devaluing of the relationship between the two, because men and women as existed between those two had a relationship that had nothing to do with sexual, the damaged sexual component that some people are trying to push. That and you hear it in a lot of the Da Vinci ideas. That they had a son living in France, all this kind of nonsense. And so we don't want to devalue this precious relationship. So she comes to the tomb. She's not even recognizing Jesus except now that he speaks.
Yeah.
The word. And she holds on to him and says, "Sis, don't not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Go." And that is the first go of the declaration of the gospel. I am alive. She's the first one given that message to go and tell people that I'm alive. Go tell my disciples and Peter. Tell them I'm alive. That was the first declaration given to a woman, not to a man.
Yeah.
And when we talk about even the idea of who are the disciples, again, if you read the scriptures properly, there were a group of women included as disciples. And we keep on missing that when we tell the story of discipleship. That discipleship is a place for both men and women.
Yeah.
You know? So we have to be careful how we are trying to present a narrative of women in church and women in ministry and women in relationships. Even how we describe marriage. We tend to read Ephesians text, for instance, submit yourselves to your own husband. The text doesn't start there. This text says submit to one another.
So there's mutual.
The mutuality
should be, must be.
And how it is worked out.
Yeah.
But we tend to want to reinforce some of the things our church teaches, or some of the things that we ourselves believe.
Why would the pastor say so though? Because why is it necessary to carry this forward, even in the face of good exegetical and hermeneutics and people like Clinton Chisholm, Dr. Delano Palmer? Why would the pastor still running with this narrative? Why you?
Because the denomination says this is the position. And when when the denom says this is the position, and you go for your interview, and you want your credentials, and you know so the party line is this, and they say, Robert, what do you believe about so and so, and they pull that particular part of the creed. Either line up or do something else. And sometimes that's a part of the thing.
Yeah.
In my case, in my own church group, when I was being interviewed, I said, brethren, here is my position. I know what the church position is. Your choice is to take me with my position or don't take me. Thank God, they say, we appreciate it. We are not telling you that we're going to change our position because that's your position. But I thank God for those men who lead my congregation at the time who said, thank you for being open enough to say you don't believe how we have structured in respect to women. But we are willing to accept you with your view.
Yeah.
And what we did was to go back to the scriptures, and we began to look at some of the things. And in fact, where we started is not where we are today. It's not even where I would like us to be.
Yeah.
But what I enjoyed about that particular group of leaders is their willingness to go back and look at the scriptures.
Yeah, which is, it has to be that.
Yeah, man. But I'm challenging brothers, not only, and pastors in general, not only to look at that, but some other things that do make no practical or spiritual sense in how gospel is to be lived up. And go with a conviction of a hermeneutic that is consistent, that is clear, that is defensible, so that when I am speaking, everybody knows I'm speaking with a clear hermeneutic that can be applied in a particular way. True. So I see it for what it is, I can assess it, and then I can work through it based on what you have presented. Yeah. And that's the problem, I think, in our church. It's not that willingness. There's more of a position, a hunger and a lust to be in position rather than to honor the word.
Hey everybody, I hope that you have just been enjoying this conversation and learning as well. Like, we are not saying that we are there. Like Paul, we are saying, we are stretched, we are yearn, we are push, we are strive. We are doing everything to reach that place where God would want us to go. And we have learned along the way. We have failed many trip-ups. We have left many bruised situations in our past as well. But we are saying we have learned the lesson. We are learning the lesson. We want to teach the lesson. We want to continue to teach this lesson as we learn ourselves how to be men of God. Austin said that he is a man of God, and we are trying to say, people, we are men of God, but we are real men of God. We're not going to put on the facade. We're not going to wear the mask. We are trying to make sure that this thing goes forth and that this thing is said the way it ought to be said. But we're going to stop the conversation here because this conversation went on for a while. Like, we spoke for over an hour. Just two brothers talking and talking from our hearts and sharing some of our experiences. So we're going to stop the conversation right here. We're going to go now to Father Austin's insight. Big man, Father Austin, come talk to the people.
Greetings. I want to use my 5.5 minutes not to preach and pontificate to the collective masses, but to preach and pontificate to those who would deign to preach and pontificate, including myself. It is not a cliche. Children live what they learn. Children learn what they live. Praxis. Please allow me to say something that might sound counterintuitive to the project at hand. We talk too much. Yes, we. First person plural, including myself. We, I, them, they, he, she talk too much. There is so much talk these days. Podcasts, sermons, motivational speaking, webinars, Facebook, Yap what? Or is it WhatsApp? Just yap, 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 yap. Did someone say TikTok? Everybody and them auntie is a vlogger. The average church goer hears well over 200 sermons per year. Now, Nehemiah is my favorite prophet. It is said he never did anything without praying and never prayed without doing something. Praxis. Why is it with so many sermons and discourses and Bible studies and various social media proselytizing, we can't seem to reach the heart of the people? I'm not throwing a stone now. But is it that those of us who are doing so are doing it to boost resume? A lot of preaching and not nearly enough praxis. I do honestly believe that if we practice more of what we preached, we wouldn't have to preach so much. Nothing is wrong with preaching. It is the entree of the Christian's spiritual diet. But I have seen and heard it all, from the boardrooms to the church halls to the dance hall video light to the bars, and even in Parliament. The telling what to do, but not doing the telling. Trust me, people would rather see a sermon than hear one. Praxis. Hear the word of God in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. You know how we lived among you for your sake. You became imitators of us and of the Lord. Imitators of us. Can you imagine that? Imitators of us. The Thessalonian church was imitating the lives of the leaders because of the life they were living. Preaching and a whole bungle and container load of praxis. Think about it. You have people at a place. You preach to them. They say they are hungry because they really are hungry. And then they are told they can't get food for their bellies. No, star. No. Find some fish and bread and feed them. And don't take the escape route either, but you're going to pray for them. The only praying you should be doing is saying grace over the food you have provided for them to eat. Praxis. I plead with you all to start practicing more the preaching of what it is to be real man, men, boys, males of God. Practice it. For God's sake, practice it. Let every little child to every great-old man see your practice and imitate you in the way you imitate Christ. That's the only way we can start to impact those present and forge ahead to shape the future generation. Our actions, our levity, our display of earnest, spiritual, sincere manhood will engage others and shape the cultural landscape. Let me finish up my 5.5 minutes with lines from an epic Christian anthem. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way. May the footprints that we leave lead them to believe, and the lives we live inspire them to obey. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. Blessings.
Yo, Father Austin, I dropped some atomic bomb. The man I beg we not just talk the thing, but do the thing. Word is important. Word is essential. Our integrity means that our words are our bonds. Right? But the man I say, yo, after we talk, we have to get up and make sure so the actions synchronize with the talk. Father Austin, big man thing. I love you, my brother. We can't say that openly without no apology to no boy or no girl, no boy or no girl, right? But yo, very good, Father Austin. Until next week, this has been Ish Then. This is a boy, Robert Green. Father Austin, big up yourself. My brother Napoleon, big up on yourself.